All right, in this one, we're going to go over a very basic API, an API call. So we've kind of done this already. Like APIs are kind of complicated ways to say that we're getting information from some other file or some other database, some other place on the internet. So we've kind of done this already when we've just been loading data from another file. So when in our McDonald's example, when we loaded like the spreadsheet data or even the shape file or the states data, we were kind of doing the same thing that you do with an API, only we were loading it from our own files. We also weren't giving it any special information that would like reduce it. Like for instance, we didn't say, oh, give me the results just from Georgia, and it would give us that. Instead, we just got the whole block of information at once. But the underlying idea here is that the whole idea of the fetch calls, like where you're doing a fetch call and you're getting some information from some other place, underpins the notion of using like an API for geographic data. So in this example, we're just going to use a fairly common API out there that's used to do some geocoding, which we touch on in the spreadsheet example as well. We actually touch on the same API, but this is just a bit more condensed, a bit more focused on the API side of things. So when it comes to this example, you can see I have this marker here. This is in a place, you can't tell because this map is so simple, but it's in a place called Kelowna, which is where I grew up. So we're going to be geocoding for that. So what I've done is in here, I've just made a very basic map. And what I have is I've put in the address. This is the address of the place I grew up at. And I'm fetching it from this URL, nominatom.openstreetmap.org. And I'm doing a search thing, and then in a little thing we call a parameter, a Q, it says Q equals. I put in the address to search, and then I tell it some other stuff like the format and some other stuff. Then I get back some information. So first, let's just look at what I get back here, and we'll come back into the API call. So I'm console logging what I get back, and it's actually a GeoJSON. You can tell because it has that type feature collection, and there's some features. There's also some other information on it here, but it's not too important. Inside the features, there's one feature, and that one feature is a point, and it tells me some stuff. It tells me the display name, Summerside Drive, in Kelowna, and it tells me all about the road and the postal code and all kinds of information about it. And ultimately, I use it in the code then to just create a very basic marker. I just put that coordinate in there and put the marker on the map. Okay, so we get the basic idea here. I'm giving it the address and it's returning to me like the actual geographic location. This is geocoding. But what is this thing? This thing I'm calling, or this file that I'm fetching? We've used fetch for files. So it's a bit more complicated than a file. You're actually hitting like a little application, which will take your parameters that you give it, some information, in this case the address and some other information. It'll take that, it'll process it, and it'll give you back a result, like an actual, almost like it creates a file on the fly that then you just read. So if I come back here to look at this and I just let this, let me see here, do we have the actual call that happens? Let's see, nominatom, right here. So we can actually open this directly in the browser. This is what I sent, when I did that fetch call. This is the same thing that's generated if I was to console log. If I was to console log this actual little string I created here, we would see that it looks just like what I have there. And if I copy this whole thing and I put it in here, there's some spaces, but those spaces get replaced with special characters. And this is the GeoJSON that comes back to us. This is the same thing as this, right? It's like it created a little file on the fly. So that's kind of what an API does. Now, this API is called Nominatom. It's provided by OpenStreetMaps. It's actually completely free. It does have some limits on how much you can use it, because as you can imagine, when you hit it every time, it has to do some processing. And also, if there's millions and millions of people hitting it at once, it could cause a lot of costs, just like if you had to load a website millions of times. So there's some API documentation, there's some information on the usage policy and stuff, but they say, for occasional use, here's the API documentation and some stuff you can do with it. It says here you can find places by name or address, which is what we're doing, and some other stuff. But that's mainly what it's for. So yeah, so and then when you come in here, now every API is going to be documented differently, just like every library. In a way, APIs and libraries are kind of similar things a lot of the time. Sometimes those even get intermixed, those words. But an API here is, I think it stands for, application programming interface, something like that. It's basically a way to access the data that Nominatum has by providing what you want, by giving some information to tell it the specific piece of data that you want. Nominatum has a database of like all the addresses and locations in the world, basically. And you're not going to get them all every time. You just need one or two. So you tell it what to do. So APIs have what we call endpoints. An endpoint is one of these things: /search, /lookup, /status, /details. And each of these has a slightly different function that it can do, a slightly different thing it can do. We're going to use the /search, and we do that. We know we're using /search in our example because right here I'm going /search. So it will tell me just how I am going to query this. Query it is when we ask for the information. It gives me the little URL here, which is really nice. Some APIs don't actually do that, and you have to kind of figure it out. And then there's this little question mark, and then it says params, okay? Now there's a special way that we format parameters so that a URL will work with them. We put this question mark, and then we put what we call a query string. There's like the parameter name or property equals, and then the information we want. And every time after the question mark, we separate more parameters with an ampersand, with an and symbol. Bit complicated, but it's something you'll see very commonly. So they'll have an example somewhere down here, I'm sure. Maybe they do. You can see this question mark, then Q equals, and then here's this whole address. And then there's that and, which basically says this is the end of the address. Now what format? Well, I want the format XML, and I want the polygon GeoJSON to equal 1. And that has some specific meaning in here. It says, oh, polygon GeoJSON equals 1, or KML equals 1, or SVG equals 1. You give it different options, basically. So obviously this is heading into fairly complex territory, and my goal here isn't to teach you how the Nominatum API works specifically. The idea is these type of APIs are out there, and they're available in some different ways. You might run into them. You might be working with another programmer who has developed an API that you need to query, and they're going to have to tell you what some of this information should be, some of this kind of documentation. What are the parameters that I can provide? What are the type of things I can search? This query that I can search with Nominatum is very free form. It's very open. I can just type in an address and put it in. But for this output format down here with the like GeoJSON equals 1, I can't put GeoJSON equals yes, or GeoJSON equals 0. It should be GeoJSON equals 1, or I'm risking a problem. So you can see here I've put format GeoJSON, and I've told it to give me some address details, because that's down here somewhere as well. Address details equals 1. So I've pretty much just used some kind of like straightforward like example that they have here with, one of these type of examples. I think I've just used this one and just replaced it and get some information. So this is the basic idea of an API. So I wanted to introduce you to using a fetch call. You can just use the same kind of thing. Constructing this URL using the query strings and the parameters, but those will change for every API that you're potentially using. Also, how to kind of look a little bit through the documentation to really try to find, first of all, this URL that you're going to hit, the little endpoint you're going to use, and then how you're going to construct those parameters. And remember, you can always work on this just directly in the browser. You don't have to do it through this fetch call. You can usually just put them in right here and see what changes as we change different parameters, right? So you can see when I just removed that extra detail, that address details, the thing got shorter because it's providing less details. So that's an introduction to using APIs. And then once you get back this kind of response, you might have to modify it. You might have to mess with it to get it on your map. But that's all the stuff we've done with shapes and polygons and all that. So hope this helps. See you in another one.